Thank you. I want to say thanks first to Cool Mind for, wow, what a great conference this has been, and what a wonderful welcome. And to EFTC, as we are kind of the outliers, the Americans invading your continent. People have been very kind during the last couple days, not to mention our president. Before we came, Naya got a couple of T-shirts that we left at home accidentally, which we were going to. We apologize for our president in 5 languages. This is kind of difficult. We have somebody leading our country. Over the years, I've had times in my life when I've been very, very proud of our country for what it stood for. I've been times when I've been appalled, and recently I've been horrified. I think in a lot of ways he reflects the worst aspects of our society. He's greedy, short-sighted, selfish, and bigoted. And there's a lot of other adjectives, but so I hope that when we meet again in Greece, that we will be in a better place in our country, and that the better angels of our nature will have moved us back to where we should be as a beacon of hope, of democracy, and of social justice. I also want to dedicate this, if you'll do, I have to do this, right? I'm used to saying next slide. I want to dedicate this presentation to a very, very wonderful man, a very close friend of mine, Harry Wexler, who passed last November. Harry was a protege of George de Leon, and what he took on was proving, as George has been so important in terms of laying the foundation for the credibility of therapeutic communities to a much wider audience. Harry was really critically important in demonstrating the efficacy and the humanity of therapeutic communities in correctional settings. The first conversation I had with Harry on the phone, called him and some other people. We were looking for some statements about how important it was to have recovering people working in therapeutic communities, an ongoing battle. And Harry said, "I'm a non-researcher researcher." I said, what are you talking about, Harry? That doesn't make any sense at all. And he said, well, a lot of researchers are kind of in the ivory tower and, publish or perish. And he said, I want to do things that really make a difference in people's lives. And that's why I really focused on therapeutic communities. And I said, well, what's the thing that really resonated for you in terms of therapeutic communities? And he said, and I'll always remember this, they give people dignity. And I think that's we talked a little bit about that this morning in our roundtable discussion. The importance of giving people dignity and telling them that they can make a difference, that they can not only change their own lives, but they can be so important in changing other people's lives. And I think that is a message, no matter where we are in the world or what we're doing, that is so profound and so important to the work that we do. I miss Harry. I wanted to start this because our talks are brief and there's an awful lot of things we can't cover and can't say. So I want to give you some resources. This is something that's on our website, Building and Replicating an In-Prison Therapeutic Community that Reduces Recidivism. This was our first prison project in 1990, the Donovan Project. Harry did an outcome study on that under George's supervision. And it really talks about what we think were the essential elements that made that such a very successful project, where we actually reduced recidivism by 45%, which was unheard of for a population of men who were high security, and over 50% of them had crimes of violence, as well as extensive drug abuse, and it spanned over half of their lives in prison. So worthwhile to look up if you're doing this work. The other thing is this paper, which was in the Therapeutic Communities Journal, written by Harry and Michael Prendergast, kind of a survey of therapeutic communities in prison. This is, I think, available online. If not, we actually have it on our website to download in a PDF format. This is something that's available. We've done a lot of videos at Amity to help our faculty learn more about therapeutic communities. This is one I did with Harry a few years back, where he does a pretty comprehensive review of therapeutic communities in prison, how they started, what is the good, the bad, and the ugly. I think you'll find it valuable. If you go to YouTube, if you go Amity Foundation USA, there's another Amity Foundation, but it's in China. So use USA. You'll see a list of videos. This is one of those videos. And I think it's an excellent, comprehensive, research-oriented presentation on the effectiveness of therapeutic communities in prison. And this is another one which George did with us a year or so ago, which I think is very valuable in terms of how therapeutic communities have changed over the years, some of the opportunities and problems that we've had, and some of the challenges that we're facing today. So, okay. So, TCs and corrections. So, you know, the history of this is, really this is sort of in our DNA. Therapeutic communities in America started with Synanon in 1958. And by 1961, the first therapeutic community in prison started in the Nevada State Penitentiary. And it was brought there not to deal with drugs, although, of course, there were drugs. It was really to do with violence. It was a very, very violent prison. And Synanon was brought in and actually was pretty successful. This is really something we've been doing for almost 6 decades now. So we have quite a robust history. We've made lots of mistakes along the way, and we've had lots of successes. And it's important to kind of, what were the things that were very powerfully successful, and where are the areas where we kind of slipped off and went into the ditch. But you know, in many ways, many of the prison TCs have been affected more by politics than by their outcomes. So here's an example. This is from a recent paper. In the USA, prison-based therapeutic community treatment has become a dominant, evidence-based paradigm. These facilities are present in over a quarter of prisons and serve an estimated 45,000 offenders. So my question is, how many of these therapeutic communities are real? How many of them have really been implemented properly? And how many of them have said, I'm a TC, because they want to ride on the outcomes of those TCs that really have done proper implementation. And they put a TC label on their shirt and do a really kind of lousy job, and we all sort of end up having to deal with people saying they don't work as a result of that. I will tell you from my knowledge and my friends' knowledge in the United States, not very many of these things are properly implemented in therapeutic communities. They just aren't. And so proper implementation, if you want the results, you've got to do the implementation according to the book. And we've kind of written the book at this point. So what are some of the external factors that cause failure? And again, if you look at the resource materials I'm giving you, they're much more detailed, but just kind of a overview. Well, one of the external factors is the failure to ignore what is now very well documented critical elements needed for a TC to form and be successful. And over and over, I see RFPs coming out in the United States, and I look at them, and people say, why aren't you bidding on this? Is because, as I said, I can read it, and I can tell this is going to be a failure. And I'm not interested in employing people for the sake of employment to do something that I know is extending false hope to the inmates, and which essentially is eventually going to be, when they run the numbers, is going to be shown to be a failure. Inadequate funding. Sometimes folks want a Cadillac on a Yugo budget, and you have to fund these things adequately so that you can hire good people to go in. Prison work is tough, very, very demanding, as anyone who works in institutions, whether they're coming in a TC or whether they're working as a correctional officer, it's a very, very demanding job, emotionally demanding. You know, in the United States, correctional officers have one of the highest rates of depression, of heart attacks, and other kinds of diseases. It's a very, very stressful job. So you got to give people a reasonable incentives to go in. And a lack of ongoing training and evaluation. We think that we can start a program, train people once, and that's it. This is an ongoing process to keep these programs vital. And you need to evaluate them and see what you're doing. You've got to get some feedback, because if you don't get that kind of feedback, they can devolve. They may start very well. So many programs I've seen in the United States that were model programs, and when I went to look at them, they were disasters because they didn't get ongoing training. There wasn't ongoing training, and there wasn't real evaluation going on. And then failure to provide for seamless transition to community-based treatment on release. What we have proven over and over and over again, the prison program itself is not sufficient. This is a case of necessary but not sufficient. And we've done these outcome studies over and over and over again. Prison program is readiness for the community-based phase. I don't even call it aftercare. I say it's one treatment experience that occurs in 2 locations. Okay? And that's a critical part of it. If you don't do that, it doesn't pencil out financially, and it doesn't work very well in terms of the goals of habilitation. And I use the word habilitation because rehabilitation implies that we're returning somebody to a state where they were functional. Most of the people that we see in prison were never functional. A lawyer who started smoking cocaine and lost his marriage, his house, and his Maserati, once he cleans up, still is a lawyer and has a college education. But most of the folks we see are really quite different. They've never had an adequate education. They maybe grew up in families that were very, very dysfunctional, and neighborhoods that were very dysfunctional. And they don't need rehabilitation. We don't want to rehabilitate them to that state. We need to habilitate them. We need to get them to a place they've never been in their lives before. That's why it takes a while. External failures, things causing failure, and this is not going to happen in Ireland. Wow, what a great group of people you have to run your prison services here. I've now met 3, including Mr. Murphy's staff out at Montjoy, and I'm wowed. I'm really impressed. I mean, this is a very, very humanistic, thoughtful group of people who are determined to focus on the needs of these inmates and do the very best they can to get them back into society. I just am really kind of blown away by it, and you're very fortunate. But in many countries, including our own often, there is a really open hostility to therapeutic communities. I mean, people don't like them. And so there are outright attempts to subvert, compromise, and destroy the therapeutic community right from the beginning. And I've had this experience myself in startups that we did or ones that we helped start up. And it's pretty ugly. You can overcome it, but it's not fun. The other way, which is more subtle, but I think equally damaging, is tarring effective therapeutic communities with data obtained from wannabe TCs, which really never incorporated the essential elements necessary for success. So the successful ones essentially are blamed for the failures of those that really do a very good job. Internal factors, and George has talked a lot about what are the things that have really compromised therapeutic communities from the outside, and then what are the things that we've done to ourselves. One is acceptance of conditions that guarantee failure. And if you look at an RFP and you say, can I really do the essential elements of a therapeutic community here? Are the correctional officials, as they are in Ireland, wide open and ready to really work with you, in a collaborative manner and say, this is a joint venture, we have to do this together? Or are they really not interested in success and just doing a check mark in the box? If you walk into something where you know it's going to fail and take it, don't blame someone else. Failure of the first circle to form community. We've talked a little bit about this in this conference, how important it is for the faculty, for the staff to come together and themselves form community. If they can't form community, how do we expect the residents, or in prison the inmates, to form community? Failure to hire appropriate faculty, including credible role models. You know, people who have been there, who have been incarcerated and have changed their lives, have an enormous power to convince inmates in a prison, hey, I've been there. You know, I sat in the same chair. I went through the same process. I wore prison blues or whatever it is here in Ireland. And I have changed my life. I'm married. I have a family. Wow. That just takes away all the excuses. And it's very important that we have people who are credible. Failure to address, of course, the essential elements. They have to be sometimes modified somewhat in prisons. But if you don't get them in place, you're not going to have a functional therapeutic community. And faculty and staff that begin, we have different roles. The role of the correctional staff is always going to be security. It can be many other things. You know, as was explained this morning, they can be very humanistic. They can. I remember the warden when we went into Donovan, and it was a very tough prison, and he was a very tough guy. And he said, you don't run an institution with guns, you run it with your mouth by communicating. Okay? He was a very, very effective warden. But there is a security element. It's very, very important. Every officer knows that the security of that institution is paramount. And we, of course, when we go into these things, we have to also be very security-minded and make sure that we're not compromising institutional security. But we have a different role. And what I've found over the years that many of our faculty, as they go into these things, start sliding into the correctional role and forgetting their role. Factors for success, and we have all these things going on out at Mountjoy, I'm pleased to say. Dedicated space, very, very important. hiring faculty that are credible to the inmates, cross-training. We talked about out at Montjoy, they were asking me some of the things that are really important. I said, every quarter, spend a couple days, get your correctional staff that are immediately involved in this and your TC staff together and spend a couple days working out issues, training each other, and do that throughout the life of the project. Ability to screen for entry and remove for cause, so that you do that together with the TC and the corrections do that together. It's really bad when you have a situation where the corrections people put people in that you can't even interview them. They're just put in or they're removed without you knowing why. Immersion. The TC experience is an immersion experience. We want people to do, as much as possible, the whole experience to be TC, not some 2 or 3 hour experience, a few times a week. Support by the warden or equivalent, inmate release upon completion, so you don't go back in the general population, because if you do, you lose most of what you learned. And linked TC aftercare with sufficient duration. Critical. Okay, quickly I'm going to run through these, just so you get kind of a sense. Historical context. The Synanon Project, very successful, reduced violence, which is what they were supposed to do. New governor was appointed, prison was closed. Okay, not because it wasn't successful, because of politics, basically. 1974, some of you have read Martinson's Nothing Works tome, which was nothing works in correctional rehabilitation efforts. And then he went even further and said, the whole idea of rehabilitation doesn't work, it's bogus. What happened? What was our answer? Staying out, which showed that the TC was effective. That was Harry's first research project. 1980, the RAND Corporation published a study called Varieties of Criminal Experience. Anybody had a juvenile record and done 5 years of prison, hard time? Forget it. Keep them locked up forever. They'll never change. What did we answer with? This. These are all men who fit that profile. And look at the drop in recidivism if they completed both the in-prison and aftercare. Okay? This is 3 years. When it went out further, the drop was about 45%. This is actually a picture in the prison. You can see these guys are having a good time in an encounter group. 2007, California's project, which was based on the successful Donovan project, mushroomed up to 10,000 in-prison beds. And the Inspector General called it a $1 billion mistake. Here were their own statistics at the time he made the report. Okay? Doesn't look like a $1 billion mistake to me. But it was all politics. And TCs were branded as failures, even though the report primarily talked about the failure of institutions to provide the conditions for successful treatment programs. Yet, who got blamed? The providers, who were actually producing the results. This is a recent publication which is causing some anxiety. 2014 publication on some 2002 data. It was a randomized study, and it says TC treatment no better than outpatient treatment. Okay? Well, okay, it was a very, very good study done by some very reputable researchers. But what's the problem? They didn't look at aftercare. Okay? We know that none of the prison programs work really in any sufficient way unless you have the aftercare component. Okay? So this again is one of these things where it's not a bad study, but it's very much like the California thing. The headline becomes the story rather than, okay, the value of it, as George and I have talked, the value of it is you can conduct a randomized study. the sad part about it is, let's do a study that actually improves the field rather than puts another black mark on the field. Okay? So what you really see here is we had 3 programs that occurred at the same time: Amity, Keycrest, and Kyle. And what you really saw was dramatic reductions in recidivism, measurable reductions in negative behavior in prisons, which is a management tool. Okay, so there's actually a prison management issue here. In our one in Donovan, we reduced negative behaviors dramatically, by like 90% in terms of serious infractions of prison rules. They became not only good people, they became good prisoners. And you started with officers wanting to work in that unit because there was much less stress, because they were treated with respect. And so you got cost benefits for the taxpayers and public safety. And look at 3 different programs, 3 different areas of the country, 3 different populations, and you can almost lay these results on top of each other. Okay? And you really see the dramatic reduction is when you have the TC plus aftercare. Okay? And that's the opportunity you're going to have here in your first prison TC in Ireland, which is fantastic, because it's going to be a howling success. I know. So, here, Synanon was the first TC in America. It was incorporated in 1958. So next year will be its 60th anniversary of that edition of the therapeutic community. And while it had a very spectacular demise, nonetheless, on every continent, there are therapeutic communities, very robust evaluations and research showing the evidence of success with therapeutic communities, and yet to some extent we really remain outliers. Why? And we talked about that this morning, and I'll leave you with this. The beauty and tragedy of the modern world is it eliminates situations that require people to demonstrate a commitment to the collective good. A society does not offer its members an opportunity to act selflessly isn't a society at all. It's just a political entity that, lacking enemies, will fall apart on its own. And what do we do in therapeutic communities? It's the essence of therapeutic communities. We require people to act in the best interest of the community, making sacrifices, thinking about others, recognizing how their behavior affects others, and that grows them up, it matures them, and it prepares them for living in a moral way in society. And that's our gift. It's our gift not only to these inmates in Ireland, our gift to prisoners around the world who have the wonderful opportunity to participate in therapeutic communities, the gift to addicts who are suffering, coming from horrible situations, and hopeless, broken, to reclaim their lives, to have hope and dignity in their lives. But also we set an example of how this methodology can be used in our society much more broadly for immigrants, for refugees, for other folks, for aged people who are so terribly isolated in our society, for young people who are increasingly alienated and depressed and don't feel like they have a place in the world. We have a wonderful tradition, and we have a wonderful gift. And it is my pleasure to work with all of you and with my colleagues to talk about this and to share this gift. Thank you.